Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 16 of Tactical Crouch. That's right, 16 episodes. I said last week was 16. It wasn't. It was 15. This week is 16. I triple-checked it, so you can get that out of the way. YouTube commenter, I see you. Thank you for commenting. We got it right this time, though, so beware. We've got a really special show. Obviously, Joe is not here. He's out and about doing his things. But we've got a pretty great guest this week. Head coach, LA Gladiators, DPei, also known as DPei. David, welcome, man. It's really good. We've chatted once before last year for an Overwatch League daily episode. It was like a 15-minute, super on the record formal interview. And this week, you're bearing it all. That's what you told me. You're bearing it all.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just leaking all the information, scrim results, everything. It's all here. Yeah.
Scrim results. There you go. You heard it here first as well. We got scrim. Oh, man, we're going to get you in too much trouble. We won't do that. We play nice. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's great to have you here. I'm really excited. You and I have been chatting ever since it was like, a month ago. You sent me a message on Discord and been like, hey, really been enjoying Tactical Crouch. And if you need somebody, and I was like, how soon can you come on? it was that quick.
Yeah, I love what you guys do. I watch your podcast at 2 times speed, so the intro music is like super fast, but it sounds actually even better in some way. Like I'm really getting hyped for it. It's like boom, 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 boom.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so we got now what we know what we can do to mess up DPei, Yiska, is we talk really fast in the episodes from now on.
Oh yeah.
So then it's like playing at 4x speed.
I'll change it at like 1.75. YouTube's great. I use that for lectures in college as well. Just very time efficient.
Awesome. Yiska, what have you been up to, man? You've been on a few podcasts this last week. Did I see you thinking it over, or did I dream about thinking it over?
No, not thinking about over. I had a pod with Sideshow on Tuesday, and yeah, whenever that will come out. The one before that is already not out, so it will take some time till that's. But yeah, we got into a nice challenge, so yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's not about us this week, Yiska. It's about this guy in the middle here.
True.
We got quite a few good questions, I would say. We're gonna hit it hard this week. We'll start out with some softballs, though, and honestly, we're just here to chat. So you know,
I like hard questions. So if you got hard questions, hit them.
I just immediately went like, what would Yiska ask after that? Because it would be like the most trolly question ever, and I didn't have one. So what I do want to do then is I want to start first of all with your off season. Obviously, you've had about 6 months of. I don't know what you've been up to. What have you been up to? What's that been like?
There was quite a bit of a break between the finals and the actual off season, just like personal break, and the team wasn't doing much. There wasn't much happening. But I think around August, I would say, people started like scouting for their Overwatch League team, their contenders team. Even I think earlier than August too, like a little bit in September, just depending on the team. So I was doing a bit of scouting and scouting and then looking at our contenders team specifically and kind of seeing if there were any good matches. We had like an open tryout, and it was for everyone. Just like if you did really well in the tryout, you maybe were considered for OWL. But it was mostly for contenders, just kind of seeing what the talent pool was like.
Is that with your academy team?
Yeah, with our academy team. Yeah. Okay. Because we didn't know who would get picked up from our academy team at that point, so we were kind of just like figuring out, one, who is getting picked up by OWL teams, and then two, where we need to fill those replacements. So and also we were looking for our own OWL team as well during that time, but it was in separate tryouts depending on like the person's agent or just like the contract that they were on with their own contenders team.
Can I ask, you said if they didn't good in trials, what does doing good in trials mean? Do you really consider like the level of play, or do you, I mean, you have a sample size seeing how they played the contender season, and I would argue these matches are a little bit more important than the trials matches, right? In terms of gouging how good the player is, because that's actually under pressure in a competitive environment, you know? What does doing well in trials mean?
We actually like history. I think is important. Like historic success, I think is important, and then how they prove to play in a match is important. But at the same time, like you guys know, like for scouting purposes, the VODs provided are very scuffed, to say the least. You're getting a first person, and it's not always the person you're looking at. You don't see what the person's doing, so you get like a tenth of their effectiveness. Over the course of a season, you can kind of point to someone's effectiveness, but then you have to point to like relative strength of that contender's region, relative strength of their team, like how much of that is team play, their strategy. So we tried to put as much weight into the tryout, and I think the tryout itself is like quite a bit of pressure for a lot of the players. Maybe it depends on each player how they interpret it, but if I were a player, I would view like an OWL tryout as very intense, and very stressful. So I would be kind of put under a similar situation. So for the positions we were looking for, we looked at every single player's VOD. And they had at least 4 hours of gameplay. So we did give them all like I would say a fair chance. And obviously some we skimmed through more over time, just like kind of like we were like, this wasn't good enough type of thing. But if the player showed true potential to be on the OWL team, we gave them as much time, looked at the VOD twice, even 3 times. It just depended on how close they were to legitimacy.
That makes sense. Can
I ask you then, kind of piggybacking off of that, is the idea of two-way players, and obviously you've signed one with Panker here. I mean, what can you tell us about the decision to utilize two-way players and how you might look at utilizing those, as well as how Panker maybe, without divulging too much, I understand how Panker might kind of factor into, or just two-way players in general might factor into the Overwatch League, because there's a lot of kind of mysticism about what the actual purpose for this is. If it is for a player who just isn't performing in an Overwatch League and they need a replacement ASAP, and that's like the best way to get one, and someone who's in the system. Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think if you're like I'm not super familiar with exactly how they're utilized in, say, basketball or baseball. I think you can have like people go through the minor leagues or the G League and back up to the major leagues. But I think in general, I won't talk about how we will use Panker or anything, but in general, I think it probably is more like this is someone that you see having potential, but you can't foster their potential on your main team because you have to focus on the success of your main team. But they can have a lot of success in contenders just with play, like raw play time. I think is important. If you're an OWL player and you're sitting on the bench, it might be useful for you to just get as much play time as possible. Do half and half with team OWL practice and then with contenders practice or something like that. It gets kind of sticky, but I don't think overall they're as impactful as people might think they are, but certainly it is good, I think, right? It strictly gives you more options. If you use the two-way contract and just make the person like an OWL bench player, it is the same. There is no difference other than later you can move them to contenders if you want, and you kind of protect that player's trade rights, right? But other than that, I don't think there's really too much of a fundamental difference. I think how they will be used will be ultimately minimal, but I think you can get gains from it in general. But I'm interested to see if anyone like uses them properly. I imagine that either the two-way player is just fully moved up to the OWL team or mostly on contenders. Very little back and forth because there's like rules against that. I think you can only play like them twice in a stage, or else they can't play in contenders at all for at least that whole season of contenders. And there's been very little seasons of contenders, right, overall. So that kind of like reduces their efficiency. So I don't think it'll be too impactful on the league overall, but I could be wrong. That's at least how I interpreted it.
Yeah. In my mind, it's like once the transfer window closes and something unforeseen happens, that's maybe where you see some of those two-way contracts pop, where they take them over the 2 games per stage and make them a full contract just because you can't do anything. Like someone has an illness or is really off their game in the main position. I guess that's when it happens. But I would be very surprised if, I mean, in the first place, there aren't that many two-ways, and I would be surprised if more than, let's say, 20% of those contracts were converted or like were made as such that then this player can't play in contenders anymore.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I don't know. That's why I'm not a coach. Sure, that makes sense, Yiska. It's really interesting. I really hope that they flesh out the two-way system a little bit more, because I do think that there is a lot of, especially when you're dealing with metas that are changing, stage to stage, it can really affect the players that you have ready. And having a Zarya sit on the bench for three stages maybe isn't the best use of their time, or honestly the organization's money either, and they could get a lot of valuable time down in contenders. I mean, I don't know. I'd like to see a little bit more back and forth.
I think it depends to and I hope Blizzard changes this. Just contenders and OWL has been on different patches the entire lifespan of OWL. So it could be good, it could be bad to have a two-way player who explores the next meta or something like that. But even then, you're not even sure which patch you're on a lot of the times, and it's kind of confusing. So I think that would be nice if Blizzard somehow standardized that. Contenders is one patch ahead. Contenders is on live all the time, and then OWL is preset on these preset dates, two weeks before the stage, whatever that patch is. It's that patch. I think if they standardized it for contenders, you could maybe get more value, but because of that, it even becomes more complicated in terms of efficiency, moving someone up and down, and also just there's a lot of knowledge you kind of gain from being in scrims and in the league. You just know this is how every team runs Temple of Anubis. This is what people ran on Numbani last year. This is what people are running on Numbani this year, type of thing. And it's accumulated knowledge that you can't really quite quantify. And for different positions, it means different things. But having that knowledge would be really good. So the two-way player just, to me, is super complicated. But at the worst case, it's just a bench OWL spot that you can have them practice in contenders. And I think that's a very reasonable take on it.
Sure.
Because any other thing would just be them being a OWL bench player, and then it doesn't matter if they're two-way or not. Only innate.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, let's talk about your Gladiators a little bit, David, because man, we've got a lot of good questions here, and it's a funny. Let's talk about this first. You said it to me in Discord a couple times. You said it publicly in a tweet to kind of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but kind of temper expectations for this year. And that's kind of in response to a lot of power rankings. I think we all had the Gladiators in the top 5. I haven't seen really the Gladiators outside of the top 5. What do you see as your biggest challenges to make the Gladiators a top 5 team in Overwatch League Season 2?
Yeah, just to address the first part about tempering expectations, I hadn't seen my team even play at that point because they were just getting visas. We were confident in our tryout process and that the players would be good, but I think each year is a blank slate for a team, especially if you get new players. Even if you don't get new players, it's a time to redo things if you did things poorly in the past, or just you want to do things more optimally. So I think for me, it's more just if people say we're good, I don't really care. You can't care about expectations as a player, as a coach, because it's only the expectation of yourself, of your teammates that really matter, right? So it was more of that. And also just kind of noting it's weird the narratives that go on, right? We're a team carried by Fissure, we're not a team carried by Fissure. Yeah. The story bounces, and for no logical apparent reason. So to see us high ranked after losing our perceived best player, right? And someone who did have a ton of effectiveness on our team for match results. I think it's just a weird narrative more so than anything. Not that I don't think the legitimacy of the power ranking is wrong. I'm just kind of noting I think power rankings are just weird in general, and the narrative with our team is weird. And I think only time will tell. I'm kind of just we'll just see what happens type of guy. I think there are people who will undoubtedly be 1 and 2. We know Nixel and Spitfire, they're going to be in playoff contention no matter what, right? We think that maybe some of the bottom tier teams might just stay there, right, and might just continue to be the expectations that we think. But then between that, there's 15, 16, 17 teams, right, that I think can float massively, especially this year in the league. I think they can float massively between the top half, middle, bottom half. I think they can float massively just because I think the potentials or the the talent is really high now, like the individual skill is really high, and then we're at more of like a teamwork based meta compared to Dive, which was although a lot of teamwork, Widow and Tracer just like are the highest skill cap characters in the game, I would say, and just can take over a game by themselves. Whereas now it looks like we're moving towards more of a diverse meta where we switch around things as team play is more important. So I think it really, this season's going to be really interesting from my POV, just because I think everyone between like spots 3 and 18 can just bounce between the week, between the meta, between, I don't know, internal issues, whatever it may be. I think they can just bounce around a lot.
Will you tell us who your 20 and 19 is?
I feel super. I don't think I have an exact one. No, I don't think I'll say it. I feel like it's just rude.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's all right.
And maybe they won't be, right? Like I mentioned before, I think there's a ton of variants. Like I think Boston season 1, they looked not too good at preseason, right? Or like the scrims before preseason. Just like even from my own view, but then they got their shit together really fast for. Oh, can I curse? I can't curse.
You can.
Right?
I mean, I can bleep myself, but you can't.
Okay.
But it's fine. Yeah, go nuts.
I'll
go
refrain
nuts.
from cursing. Sorry,
Please
but
do.
Boston like showed up stage 1 and they went 6-4 or something, which was really really good, and nothing that I would have expected even with the scrim results from preseason. So that's why I don't want to say like, oh, X team is really bad right now, right? It could be the meta,
and it's something that we've like denoted multiple times on the podcast is like, more than anything, the rankings are just like a footnote to the justifications of how the team looks going into the season, right? Like we took the really unscientific approach of signing a 1 through 20 value to 20 teams, which already is like, you know, we all have tier lists. We all have we're not like, yeah, we argued it. NYXL over London. We did it. Yeah, let's fight about it. It was a great podcast, and a lot of people tuned in, and I think really enjoyed it. And some got mad and uninstalled and never listened to the podcast again. But like, it was a really fun conversation to have, and there's value in that. But at the same time, I don't think anyone's kidding themselves that there's kind of there's no crystal balls in Overwatch, right?
No.
And it's just kind of like, hey, what's a fun way to like create some content around what's exciting going into season 2, which teams are looking good and which teams aren't, right?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we've been 6 months out of the season, and like I understand why the hype is there, why people really want to know, like kind of like predict who's really good. I totally understand. I'm just noting from kind of my POV.
It is like, yeah. I already have an apology letter written out to Boston fans where I put them at 16. Like it's already written. Yeah. It's in the mail. I just got to stamp it and ready to go.
But if they end up being 16th, then you're a god, right?
Well, I also have that letter written as well. So, you know.
That's like suck it Reddit, like
told you.
Suck it Twitter, like
told you I'm a god.
The best.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. it's both ways I win. Let's go back to your Gladiators though, because we were talking a little bit about the loss of Fissure, and you kind of mentioned like there's both sides of that. Like some people are like, you know, you were carried by Fissure, you weren't carried by Fissure. Something that has me really excited about the Gladiators in season 2 are some of your pickups. So you picked up DPei and Roar from Kongdu Panthera, Ripa as well. So now you have your support trio there. You've got all that going on. I think there's a lot of exciting things going on with some of the pickups you made, and I think specifically DPei and Roar, really excited about it. And I would love to hear more about, you know, how that process came to like, yep, that's the fit for our team. I'm more excited about it than the Fissure pickup personally, based on what I heard. So, tell us a little bit more about that process.
It gets complicated because I don't know, like, I'm sure the other teams were interested in, like, the same players we were interested in, right? Yeah. Like, we were looking at runaway players as well. Like, there were just, like, a lot of balls in the air that I don't really know, but I just know that Void obviously came from Kongdu Panthera, has a good relationship. Only played, like, a little bit of time with Roar and Void, but had a good relationship. Roar and DPei had a good relationship with DPei, and so he kind of like was like, these players are really good. We scouted them, we looked at them in like a tryout thought which one was the best fit for our team, kind of which one filled the most holes. We also looked at like individual play a lot because we kind of noted in season 1 that you just need mechanically or individually skilled players. I won't say mechanically. Mechanics, I think people confuse individually skilled players and at the right positions too. So I think DPei really filled in like the hole that we didn't have, which was just like a really flexible players across hit scan and projectile, and particularly someone who plays Tracer as well, just in case she comes back in meta. Right now, you don't see it a lot, but undoubtedly she could come back, right? And when she was in meta, she was very, very valuable. So it just kind of made sense from our perspective. They were our top choice, and we got our top choice, so that was very fortunate for us, I will say. And hopefully, I think we were their top choice as well. So perfect match, you know.
I mean, it must have been, because especially DPei, and this is where you put your poker face on, had a pretty high buyout and was also very much thought after by many teams, as far as I've heard. And I think that the fact that you had that personal connection with Void certainly helped. And it's also interesting to me to see how that comes together, because if I remember correctly, the last time when Raw and Void were playing together, it feels like Void was, for instance, definitely in the discussion as like one of the best divas in the world, most definitely. And I mean, divas are very hard to evaluate at the same time, right? I'm not sure anyone can have a confident opinion on them without the replay viewer, but yeah, it's certainly exciting to see. And I think that also justifies, in a sense, your power ranking placements, simply because, I mean, these are the Congo Panthera players. By all rights, they should have won that final. Yes, it was a fortunate matter probably for that team, but still at the same time, I think personally you got the crown jewels from that team. And if I had to pick 2 players from Congo Panthera, I would have picked DPei and Roar. And yeah, I think like Shiny Dragons isn't getting the stronger half or third of the roster.
Yeah, just to address a couple of points. I think I think that team was very strong. Like their other players were strong. It's just they didn't fit kind of like parts of our team, and also like the English-Korean balance insofar as like our full English coaching stuff. But I think like Luffy was really good on that team. I think Ding was really good on that team. I've heard good things about Koma for his shot calling. I think that team was actually like better as a whole, certainly, like was a good team. And like you said, was just a game away from beating Runaway. Maybe a fortunate meta for them, like you mentioned, but undoubtedly was very good. And then the other thing, DPei does have like these high expectations around him, but I think people forget, like, I won't talk about his buyout price exactly. I will just know that the reported rumor is wrong, right? That's all I can say. It's like, I know Sinatra had like the meme, like Mr. 150K or whatever, and DPei is going to get like the Mr. 300 or whatever the reported amount was, but that's wrong. I can let you know that now. But DPei is just a 17-year-old kid from Korea who's coming down to the States to play in a professional league. Like, I just want everyone to like take a step back to when they were 17. I was a complete idiot. So I mean, like, while
Pizza
I think the guy is really great. What?
I said pizza rolls all day, man. That was If there was a league for that, I was in.
Yeah, I had the mental maturity of like a 5-year-old when I was 17. I'm pretty sure. So, and I'm not saying DPei is like a good player, bad player. I'm just kind of noting like he is young. People need to give him time, and I don't think the expectations should be super high on him. Yeah, because he's literally a 17-year-old kid from another country coming to this country because he just so happens to be really good at Overwatch, right? And so there's a lot of things that make this game a team game. I'm sure he will shine. Because I think he's a really great player, and I think that he's proven himself in contenders. But I think the expectations on this literal kid is like too high. So I just kind of wanted to address those points specifically.
I mean, it's easy to forget because by Overwatch standards and how long he's already played, and also played at the top level, he's almost a veteran for an Overwatch player.
Almost, yeah. I think maybe like Surefour is by far the most veteran, but
I mean that definitely is true.
Yeah, that's right. So you mentioned the mixed roster, though, and I think that's a really interesting piece because the Gladiators are coming in with a pretty mixed roster going into season 2. I mean, and you just mentioned as well, in all English-speaking coaching teams. So, number one, how are you addressing this going into season 2? And number two, how big of an impact do you really think language barriers are? Because one of the first things people bring up, it's almost like the first thing they analyze is language barriers, and they stop their analysis right there. This team isn't going to do good because half is from China and half is from the United States. What are they going to do? How are they going to communicate? And I get that. I think there's some validity in talking about the barriers that language have in Overwatch. But at the same time, you know, we've seen mixed rosters be successful. So I know that was long-winded. But first, how are you addressing language in going into season 2? And number two, do you think that language barriers in Overwatch, specifically for the Gladiators, is something that fans maybe should be worried about?
Yeah. So just as far as how we're addressing, we're a full English strategic coaching staff is what I will say, but we have 2 bilingual Korean coaches. One's like more strictly a translator, and then one's our like manager, and he acts as like closer to like a Korean performance coach. Like Koreans just deal with things differently in terms of like mentality and stuff like that. Culturally, they are much different. So you can't have a Western performance coach kind of tell them what to do or be like their mental coach, really. This person, like Kez, is 31. He's really experienced in esports. He played professionally in League of Legends. Age is really important in Korean culture as far as like seniority and stuff. So Kez, I think, is a very like valuable asset for our connection to the Korean players. It's just more so when it comes to strategy, it is difficult to explain. And I think like there are like problems that you face. You said like how are we addressing it? It's the same stuff that we did last season, except better, right? We simplified the Overwatch language for them. Things outside of game, like that's just, we understand that's going to come slowly with time. We try to have as many one-on-ones with our players in general, English or Korean, and this gives them a time to kind of explain themselves more fully, have more time to explain rather than the fast pace of practice where we're like, okay, we need to do this, this, and this. I think those like steps were already put in place from before. There's no like conclusive way to deal with it, right? Even going to traditional sports, there's not a lot of mixed teams, you would say. It's really more epidemic in esports where you get Chinese players, Korean players, and put them on your team because of their historic success, right? But I think you just have to work with it over time. Void has already learned like a lot of English, I will say. And not that he's like great or perfect or anything, but we saw with Void, we saw with Asher, we saw with Fissure that they learned over time. And so you have to think about language as kind of an investment and something that is a slow hurdle. And in the meantime, you're going to just have to spend twice as much time as other teams, right? Through translation. Like if you're going through a strategy, we just have to assume that if it takes 30 minutes to explain in English, it should take about 30 minutes in Korean. In our one-on-ones, it's going to take longer with those Korean players, but it's worth the investment. So we just have to spend more time with it, be more patient with it as well. And I think it is like, there are inherent problems to language barrier in terms of like team chemistry and stuff like that. But I think our players have had really good chemistry like across nationalities, across language, just in general, right? Like Asher on our team, Void on our team had really good relationships with everyone on the team. Bishu kind of serves as a bridge between that, in between the game. I think or not in between games, like outside of scrims, he really does serve as a really good cultural like bridge. In game, it's like harder for him, and just like it's fast paced, and we try to go over strategies beforehand, so it's not as like he has to serve as an in-game translator as much. But I think we have like the tools and the systems set up in place, and we're kind of already aware of these issues. It's just kind of like our patience with it, as well as the other players' patience with it. And our returners have experience with it. I'm sure it's mostly new for like Roar, DPei, and Ripa, who haven't been on mixed teams before. So I think we are prepared for it, and I think it's something you worry about in the sense that it's a problem that exists, but not something that you can really. We're already doing all the actionable steps towards it, so it just is going to take time.
Can I just briefly flank in, even though that wasn't the questions, but this is like a personal interest of mine. It's like, okay, so in season 1 we saw a lot of teams that had their cores together, or the 6 together, like an Envy, like the GC Busan coming in. And it was always reported to me that their calling structure sort of just organically grew together. And when you pulled one of those players out, because for whatever reason, maybe he was individually underperforming, it was very hard to assess what the player that comes in even has to do. Like nobody really cognitively or like you know the word, thought about the calling structure and really delegated tasks. It's more like, because the way Overwatch was before Overwatch League wasn't all that professional. It just grew together, and the coach just said, okay, you figure that out yourself. And then the players among themselves saw, okay, that works. But if you take one out, nobody really has an intrinsic feeling of, okay, he does that, and he just does that, and you need to do that. Do you have like a set calling structure set up where you go like, okay, I expect this from my main support and I expect this from my main tank?
I think it's going to change with the players that you get. It's just going to be much different is what I will say. Like playing with Fissure versus playing with Remix, how to optimize that team's comm structure is much different. So like just we're talking about season 1. I think you just have to play with you see what your players like initial like penchant is towards comms and like how they communicate. We have like a system in place. It's not perfect, right? And it's not like different metas different metas will have different levels of urgency and stuff, but we have like a comm system in place such that it is dynamic and does change, and we let players know when that changes. If someone has a game-winning call, we need them to be urgent regardless of the position they're at. So we try to make it as democratic as possible, but naturally, like you said, organically, teams do find ways where it's like this person is doing this. We have like set roles for certain things, but for the most part, I will say it's dynamic in that we cater to what the player's original penchant is, and if their original like comm levels, I guess, are not what we like, then we will change that very quickly, or at least try to. So. I hope that answered your question.
yeah, definitely does. Yeah. So if we're thinking about these delegation tasks, so coaching is a very broad field, like what you could theoretically do, how people interpret the role. It's probably more open than the GM role is right now. And the question is, how do you personally interpret the head coach task, and do you do the strategy? And also, this is interesting because a lot of people stepped to me and said, okay, there's a guy in Gladiators nobody talks about, and his name is probably absolutely not known to the vast majority of the audience, and it's the real Tim and how he comes in creating these strategies.
His name's just Tim, by the way. I think his Twitter tag is the real Tim, but he goes by Tim. His in-game name is Tim.
Makes sense. Very creative, yeah.
Anyway, okay, so how do I interpret my head coaching role? I think there are like, I'll just simplify it. There are like 3 axes you can like rate a coach on, and you should be a perfect head coach is a 10 out of 10 on all these. So one of them is the X's and O's, like the actual strategy of the game. This will include macro, micro, individual. That is really important. And I think as a head coach, even though it's not necessary, you should have like this is an axis that you want to be judged on. The second one is player management skills. So like, how do you deliver to players, like the mentality side? How do you deliver the strategic advice? How do you really deal with players individually on a personal basis? This one's more general, right? Like it can apply to mentality, strategics, personal life, whatever it may be. This is obviously just important for coaching, not specific to head coaching, but it is very important. And the third one that I think particularly relates to head coaching is how you deal with staff and how you create structure. So structure and culture. So delegating for staff and then infrastructure and culture. I think those are like the big tasks that the head coach does that is really hard to evaluate, right? Like staff delegation is easier to see, but culture setting and infrastructure is harder to see. These things aren't even clear from the inside POV, right? Like from the player POV all the time, but it's clear like within the coaching staff or within your management, it's clear like what each person is doing. So for me, like I will say like I'm trying to be 10 out of 10 on all these, but going into the league, I thought that my like X's and O's. Like I do the macro for our team completely, like, or not completely, but like a majority of it, right? Tim is right now the flex. He's flexing between macro and micro. And then John, our newest addition, is dealing mostly with micro. So me and John are at opposite ends. Tim is flexing based on the meta or based on kind of what we need at the time. It changes week to week what we might need. We might need, we need Zarya help because in Ghost we're not getting enough value from Zarya or like Gravs or something. Or it's like, okay, there's new comps that are coming up. Like me and Tim are going to take a look at it. So that's kind of how we break it down, and how I view myself as a head coach in particular is I think I'm really good with the X's and O's. I think I'm really good with or like decent at culture setting, bad at staff delegation, and then I think I'm pretty decent at player management overall. But I mean, it's really hard to judge like culture, which I think is very integral to a team. But I think we have a good culture because as soon as we jumped into into scrims this season, kind of players just were repeating things that we were saying culturally. So they really believed in our philosophy and what we were trying to build in the Gladiators season 1. And even though season 1, like there were a lot of like internal issues at the end, I think that it stuck through and that the culture was set. So I think that was my POV of why things were set up good culturally. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I don't know if you had a follow to that.
No, it's basically, do you have like sentences or mantras that you repeat to the players, just like to refocus them, maybe mid match?
Yeah,
stuff like that.
We certainly have like that. That's just effective coaching, I think, is like repeating yourself, these like phrases and things that become like mottos essentially within your team. We did that last year. This year, it just feels like they embody that mentality more so. And for our newer players, less so, right? And so, but it's easier to get built into a culture once, instead of building it ground up, you just have the culture and then they're fitting into it type thing. So even with our comm structure system, like they caught on real quick. So if those things are important to the returners, they're important to the new players. So I think we set a good culture and a good infrastructure so far. And I think it's showing, at least from a practice POV.
Okay, so we were talking about hard questions. So this is when we hit that, because I think when we're talking about team culture, there was an interesting coaching decision, executive decision last season in the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
And the question, of course, is how much is not just, okay, it might just be a gameplay decision, then it's fair enough. And then we don't really, have to elaborate too much on that. Or is it important? Because I remember I, at the time, said, if I was head coach and I take the span of whatever I expect Overwatch League to be into account, I think I'm taking my chances there. It's of course terrible for the second season, because then I set myself up for a situation where even if I get rid of that player, now the next player in line is like, well, you let that slide last time, so I can do whatever, right? Is that something that you considered in these decisions, especially around Fissure?
I won't go into too much detail. The situation is like complex, I guess, or at least like to explain would be complex. Ultimately, we did what we thought was best for the team, is what I will say. We did what was best for the team to win Overwatch League Season 1.
Okay.
It's not that I thought, and this is, I cannot make this more clear, that I do not think Fissure is worse at main tank than Remix, right? Like I cannot make that clear, because I think that would make me sound silly, and I said I think I'm good at X's and O's, and objectively Fissure is like one of the best main tanks in the league. Very objectively, that is true. So it wasn't like, I don't know where, like, we as a coaching staff, we as an organization never said meta stuff. I think that's something either other people interpreted, or like, I don't know how that rumor kind of like cascaded or anything like that. But it was just, we did what was best for the team to win Season 1. And we valued effective practice. We felt like we could get better practice with Remix. And I think that's what our statement said. For your question, like more philosophically, yes, going with the longevity of the league, going with the longevities of careers, right? Like 5 head coaches were fired in Season 1. There's 12 head coaches. Like that's damn near a 50% fire rate, right? And within one season, esports is not super long. It was a risky decision, I will say, in terms of like public thing, but I don't really care about what the public say. I'm just trying to give my team the best shot to win. So I mean, we talked about it with our management too. I'm not going to make this decision without discussing things with my management, because I need to know that my boss isn't going to fire me for a decision that we think is correct. So we had to discuss it. We had to talk about like steps to getting to this point and stuff like that. But ultimately, from all our POVs within the organization, at least management and coaching wise, it was the decision we had to make. So
I mean,
how important that is to setting culture. I can't speak because I would like devolve into details of the situation, but I do think that culture is really important, is all I will say. Like if I was another coach in a different situation, I don't know what exactly I would do. I think it is very rare to do this as a coach. I think there's not a lot of historic examples to say that this would happen, right? Someone told me actually that Bill Belichick in the last Super Bowl against the Eagles, he benched his star corner. They lost, but they benched their star corner against a really good passing team, which was the Philadelphia Eagles. And maybe that star corner could have really helped them out there against their ace receiver or whatever it may have been. I'm not too certain on the details, but I mean, Bill Belichick made that. I'm not making the comparison that Bill Belichick to be.
So what you're saying is that's the Bill Belichick of Overwatch League. Got it.
Yeah, that's quote me on that. Yeah, just historic success. 5 out of 6, like NFC or AFC championships in the past 6 years. Yeah, I'm just noting that was like the only decision that I've seen in the past that really have like that someone did something similar, and I mean, he has the legacy to do it. No one's questioning Bill Belichick. He could bench Tom Brady right now, and everyone be like, "This guy is a god," and he deserves that because of what he's done in football. But I don't think I've earned that respect. I'm just noting kind of like similar decision making.
I mean, if you look at the situation as a head coach who has way more information about the entire situation, and then say this is the better short-term deal, and now we can hypothesize that it's also the better long-term deal, that's a no-brainer. You do that every time, right? So
yeah, and weighing short-term and long-term, it gets really sticky. Like you said, there's no glass ball for Overwatch. You're just predicting the future at certain points, and you can't do that, right? Like even scouting is just predicting the future, and it's hard to do. And we take it day by day, week by week type of thing.
It's also the case that is, of course, what a lot of people don't understand is just because it didn't work doesn't mean it's the wrong decision, right?
Right.
It's like there are probabilities, and if you took the 70% win chance and you hit the 30, well, tough luck. You made the right decision, right? It's essentially a poker game then.
Yeah. And you judge those things over time, like, for example, in season 2, some questionable coaching decision happens. I think you start accumulating data, and then you're like, okay, this guy's a bad head coach. But I think you need more time to evaluate, because there's only like so many decisions that the public really sees at certain points, and so you'll see things over time more so for coaching, and I think for players as well. But yeah.
I mean, do you think that it's important then that you as a head coach or as an organization have a platform to like justify those decisions? Like there are definitely some decisions that should be totally internal, but at the same time, something that I noticed is, and something that I've kind of noticed from just chatting with you for the past 40 minutes, is there a lot of things that people, took as conjecture, didn't fully understand, couldn't find another reason for, and just kind of applied it based on whatever logical hierarchy they had in their head on what makes sense as a coach. I mean, do you think that there should be more information out there for fans of Overwatch League or LA Gladiators or whatever to make that happen, or do you think that people should just understand what's some dude on whatever Reddit's opinion or in YouTube comments opinion about that, and understand that that's not stuff that's ever going to be public?
Stuff that's never going to be public. I don't think it should be public. You don't want to see how the chili's made. Is that the expression? I think it's chili.
Just do that now.
The sausage. Sorry. Yeah, you don't want to know how the sausage is made. It's really gross. There's a lot of hard decisions. There's a lot of things that happen in the background that you don't want to know. and everyone thinks that like teams are immaculate almost, and like the team, and everyone thinks the opposite, that teams with like heavy internal issues, these are the teams that are collapsed. But like every team is close to an internal issue, I will say. Like season 1 was almost like it was a battle for who had the internal issue the least, or like the least good time, right? Like I think that is something to be understated, and winning helps a lot with internal issues. How many times have you heard about internal issues for Boston Stage 3? I'm pretty sure there were internal issues happening, but when you go 10-0, you kind of like push that aside until Stage 4 when you're struggling, right? Or after playoffs. So I think every team like needs to keep information private, and there's good reason too. You don't reduce players' trade value. You don't want to be the team that releases information about players either, because like imagine if I'm like shit talking like the players that we released, right? Like I'm shit talking Fissure, Asher, Remix, and let's say like it's justified, not justified, doesn't matter. What player wants to come to our team if we're shit talking our own players? Like sorry, trash talk. Fuck. you have to bleep all that out. Sorry for the
you're good.
Stream.
You're good.
But for the other platforms, you'll be fine with the bleeps. But yeah, I think that fans don't have a right to what the team does internally. It's just the season's hard. This game is hard. Coaching is hard. Being a player is hard. Tensions rise, and people will misinterpret things. And the only people who need to know are the people on the team. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, it's also to me, it almost seemed like that friction within the team can be a lubricant almost. Like it's like if you're all friends, like how are you really getting, like how are you fixing the mistakes or making the uncomfortable comments towards someone's play style or whatever. I think that's just inherently part of sports overall. I think just PR departments are much bigger and much more experienced and like not having that get out in normal sports, right? But it's
players are more professional in normal sports. They come from a culture that's really like, for basketball, you've been learning how to be a teammate from the YMCA level, like when you're 5 to all the way to high school to college. You get weeded out if you're not. And if you say bad things about teammates or bad PR stuff, like people won't really like that as teammates. So
sure. Yeah. Were you asked for any players to comment on them as like for so let's say did Toronto Defiant or someone like that come to you and just say how is that guy
not
like?
To me, I think if anything, it would be to our general manager Charlie, who deals with more like the contract stuff. Because every time someone asks me about like some like trading of players or something like that, I tell them to direct them to Charlie, just because like he's the person who deals with it. He comes back to me if he thinks something is like, I have a lot of autonomy, so like he really values my opinion on it. So 90% of the time 99% of the time we agree on something, come to a resolution. But yeah, it's nothing that I would like know, I would guess.
Yeah.
Fair. All right. I have to ask you a really hard-hitting question here. This is probably going to be the toughest one that you're going to get, because it's actually really integral to the integrity of this show. We've had 4 people come on and talk about their power rankings, and we've all had NYXL and London in the top 3. Sideshow and myself had NYXL below London. And then Yiska and Volamel had NYXL above London. I need to know. I asked you this ahead of time. I need a tiebreaker here. I need you to know at the end of the year, in your power rankings, your internal power rankings, you don't even have to say where they are. But I really need to know this, man.
Yeah.
Split the difference here.
I think the first question Yiska is going to ask is, how do you judge a power ranking, right?
Yeah.
I've listened to the podcast enough. Yeah, I've listened to it enough. Yeah.
Very good. Very good.
And so, like, kind of for me, I'm basing things on who will win the championship. That is my power ranking, not on like raw power of like roster strength or the regular season, but it is who I think can win and has the highest chance of winning. With that said, I think it's Spitfire 100%, because they did win season 1, so you have proof that they have won. 2, I don't think anyone talks about this enough. Their playoff run was actually insane. besides the 3-0 we Gladiators had against them, they went on an absolute tear. No one could even touch them. They lost maybe one map, like 3-1 people, but they did it every single time. They did 3-1, 3-0, 3-1, 3-0, or whatever it was. The finals was a joke. Spitfire ran through everyone, and if you saw the team that played us day one, like that is crazy to me. That they, I heard a rumor, and not so much a rumor, but Void was talking to Closer in solo queue, kind of, and I was behind the screen. I think they were warming up for a scrim or something, and Closer's just tell, or at least I'm not reading Korean, but I'm told that like Void's like, yeah, they're packing their bags to go home. Like they're like so depressed they couldn't even practice Thursday. I heard they couldn't even practice Thursday because they were so tilted from our Wednesday match that the coaches either thought it was it was described to me from Closers and then an interpreter that like, yeah, they were just depressed, not that they thought the day off would refresh them or anything like that. It's not like it's literally like they came out of the woodwork and just dominated every team since then. I can't believe that is not the most talked about storyline in all of OWL right now, that Spitfire just has a switch that they can turn on. Maybe not by will, maybe by coincidence. The meta fit them better. They had a good read on the meta, but how is that not talked about? That they dominated absolutely everyone, right? Just obliterated. And from a 3-0 from us, yeah, we had set strats. Yeah, like besides the Kings Row stuff, we had set strats on the other maps that made us do well. But even if we had set strats against London, I don't think any team is beating that team. In that iteration at that time, no team was beating London, and I am so afraid of that team. Like we're talking about teams we're afraid of. Like I am not afraid of Nixel. Super, like when we play them in playoffs, I'm not that afraid. But Spitfire, I'm afraid. I'm definitely afraid of Spitfire. Just showing what they could do last year, their peak is insane, and just their raw potential is absolutely insane. Their individual skill.
I'm laughing because I had refute this kind of format with Sideshow back in the day, and we were arguing Philly against London in terms of peak performances, and I felt like that playoff run was a very good field or like evidence for my argument that London, in fact, has the highest peak in Overwatch League.
Yeah, and I think it goes to individual skill. I don't think people say Jonak, but to me, Badosin is actually nuts. Like that guy, I'm pretty sure he calls on that team too.
He does call.
I remember there was it was Kings Row. I think it was against Philly. He's they're at the arch on second point, just under the arch, and he's taking this duel with Carpe as Zen and Widow on the left side, and I'm like, the balls this guy has, like, I don't know. Badosin to me like has that he has that unshakable confidence that I don't think you see in a lot of players, and I think Badosin has that. And then I just think individual skill on that team is one of the highest. Birdering, I think, is the weakest, and I don't think he's that weak either. And that's weird to say that I think Birdering is weak, and I thought that guy was really insane too. So just in terms of individual skill, that team is just
all insane. The good opinions you're hitting there. That's exactly what Birdering was legitimately probably the worst player across the season from the starters. And it's hard to evaluate once again, especially like the roles that have a lot of intangibles, like main support. I'm not sure how Nuss performs there, but yeah, like Birdring had a very massive drop off during the midseason. I remember our match, and it haunts me. The Oasis, he just headshot. He only gets 2 shots where he can actually shoot someone. We messed up a little bit, but he has 2 shots to hit a headshot. Widow, you actually only have like certain time frames where you can actually hit shots, right? And he hits both of them on very key targets. On our comp that we had never, like that soldier comp, we had never lost on in scrims, and like should have been good. And he hits both the shots in the smallest time frame you'll ever see. So I don't think Birdring is bad. When I say he's the worst, I don't think he's like bad by any mean. I'm just noting that is the level. Like if we're saying Birdring is the worst player on that team, worst starter performer on that team, then you're pretty fucking good. Pretty good. I think.
Sorry. Don't even worry about it. Don't even.
Sorry.
I think Birdring is almost, because he peaks so high, it's almost like I would be interested to see if London had like a solid, consistent starter. Like I have these like Wave and Tide players. So the Tide player just raises the Tide, is consistently good. Maybe someone like, it's hard to say because he's not consistently good, but consistent, let's say someone like an AKM. And then you have a Taimu who is going up and down consistently. And if you can then predict when this guy is peaking, then you put him in and it's dope, right? Especially if it happens in the playoffs.
The peak, though. That's like, we talk about how future telling is hard in Overwatch. How do you predict someone's going to pop off in a match?
I mean,
it's really hard.
I mean, absolute peak performance that day is very hard. I think there's trends over like weeks where a guy just plays for instance, Linksa was probably sort of predictable for the coaching staff. Like it was never like, okay, this play day he's super sick, and then the next one he doesn't do anything, and then he's super sick. It's usually like, okay, for a couple of weeks, this is the trajectory of the performance. And yes, there's variance in that, but the general trajectory is sort of samey. And if you can then pair them up,
I think I could see it. I'm just noting variance is something that we talk about all the time as coaching staff. Like you sometimes don't lose games because of like strategy or anything. It's sometimes just various. Like sometimes bad things just happen, and it just is unfortunate, right? But that's why you have things over time, and variance isn't necessarily a bad thing. Variance can help you, like it did Spitfire. They varied the other way.
And
so
Philly too.
Philly too, right? The 5th and 6th seed just make a tear to the first and second place of Overwatch League. So you got to peak at the right times, though.
Yeah. Yiska, I know you had one more topic you wanted to talk about before we got out of here, because we are running out of time. So go ahead.
Yeah.
Hard-hitting question here. Let's go.
Okay, so when I talk to people about what's the coaching like in Gladiators, like reportedly, and of course, like they're different level quality sources, but it's always described something sort of unorthodox, meaning maybe you're doing something else than at least what is reported to me that other coaches do. And specifically, I would say the departments of statistical analysis, just how you incorporate it. If you have a dedicated guy for that, or if you have a company, some do that. They hire a company and have like assistants there. And then the second part is VOD reviews and how long you take out of a day. So for instance, I know some teams just do it like 30-70 every day. So it's like 3 skim blocks, and then we're doing the rest like of the workday. A 9-hour workday is like VOD reviews and stuff like that. How is that in your team, and how do you think about these?
For the VOD review one, I can tell you we're doing more this year, but we always review things. It's just we haven't given enough visual aid compared to last season. We're giving way more visual aid. Like I have like 20 screenshots I'm gonna go over with my team right now, and it has a very long explanation to each. But before I would talk about it more abstractly or draw it on the board or something. When you just VOD review something to VOD review something, you don't get much out of it. Like having just we call it like undirected VOD review is damn near useless for the players. Like one, you have a mixed team, so like there's different conversations happening, and then you need the same conclusion coming on. It is no different than them just watching at home at that point, right? If you just come to different conclusions. So we incorporate things from human teaching, right? Like teaching has proven you can't just sit there in a lecture for an hour and get everything out of it. There are just key points, and you are better served in smaller bite-sized things with larger visual examples, right? With much more clarity. And you go over smaller bits and like more clarity in your certain topic. So I've seen teams I've heard teams just go over their like entire match comms or whatever it is. And I don't think that's super helpful to just go over an entire scrim block. You go over a map, you go over a team fight, you go over like one thing that you're trying to improve, 2 things, 3 things, whatever it may be, and you give visual examples for that, and then you like drive it home, right? And you're saying in these different situations and stuff like that. So I think last year we didn't do enough of it, and that was something noted by the players, is that we didn't give like visual examples in particular. I think that the amount of VOD review or like VOD review is such a weird word. The amount of reviewing we're doing, strategic review that we're doing, is more in line with just like more visual examples. I think we're going over the same ideas of stuff before, but I think we're doing a better job of it. So I don't think that's unorthodox. I think it's more unorthodox to just look at an entire tape of a team. Like in football, I don't think you look at an entire game. You break up into like, here's our quarterback squad, here's our lineman squad, and you're like saying, okay, we needed to block this, this, and this. Like you break it down like that. So we give people a lot of like individual stuff to look at, and we break it down more granularly so that it's not wasted. And plus, if VOD review wastes time, like you kind of not lose legitimacy as a coach, but like it's like what are we doing here? Like we're wasting time. We could just be doing something else, like resting or like getting into the scrim, or I don't know, solo queue practice. We could be doing something else. So you need to make sure when you use your players' time, it's worth it. So that's why we've veered away from undirected ones. We've tried it, especially with a mixed team. It's really hard. If you didn't have a strong coaching staff, like you didn't have a strong strategic coaching staff, I think that undirected VOD reviews and having the team just talk to each other is really good. But once it's a mixed team, once there's translation involved, once like there's like clashes of personalities, you need someone to direct that, and preferably the strategy to it too. So that's like a big part for us, is like I think we have a strong strategic coaching staff. Like we understand the game strategically much more than say like Spitfire, I don't think had a strong strategic coaching staff. They had like more mental coaches, right? And then their players, 7 of their players just talked about the game. Yeah. I think that's a legitimate way to do things, but I think as time goes on, like we saw that Spitfire really didn't have the best strategy going on. They just had the best players. But I think over time, you're going to need coaches who really understand the game. And I don't know about their current coach now or anything. I was just kind of noting from last season, and I'm not even sure about those responsibilities. That's just kind of a note more so than anything. You had another question about our unorthodox thing?
Let me set this up, because usually,
let's go.
There's different types of statistical analysis and where it's useful. And I think a lot of people or people that work with stats generally would agree that the biggest value share is probably coming from just finding diamonds in the rough. Now, of course, in your position where you could afford to buy there's Roar and Decay are undeniable players. There's not too much, scouting and like trying to find these gems. Everyone knew them, right? So there, the value is not as much the case. But also then maybe finding different approaches to think about things, or look at numbers, what they tell you, have someone's skills at interpreting them. I'm not sure if a full-time position just for statistics is feasible in Overwatch. But the question then is, do you incorporate them at all? And if not, why do you think there's not that much value, and why are you wasting time or resources by doing so?
Right. So let me give an example of how we like scout players. Let's just talk about Zen in particular. We have there's a lot of things that break down on Zen. Aim is like very clearly one of them, but there's orb management, both Discord and Harmony orb, and then there's trank usage, there's positioning, and then there's right click versus left click efficiency. Those are like just basic breakdowns on what you could do, let alone with comms and personality, but let's just break it down by the game. How do you value Discord efficiency? Is there a stat in game that actually tells you how much damage your Discord is at the right time, and how it forces a Brig to shield up rather than be swinging, right? Or a Ryan to shield versus swing. Trank in this meta especially, like the value of Trank, it's like, are they hitting you in your grab or not? Like that, you might not die, or you might die a ton in the Trank and it doesn't matter, right? Like, does that make it a good Trank because you had bubbles up to protect you from the Diva Bomb? Or they're swinging on you, so it has higher value, but then he has a shatter afterwards and we didn't plan around it, right? Like, how do you quantify these things? Even with in-game stats, it is very, very difficult, right? And I think Zen is one of the more simple characters, I would argue, right? Like in terms of ability usage, like it's very, like the abilities are much more straightforward. Like it doesn't alter your positioning all too much. It doesn't, you just like have more straightforward uses to it. It applies to once. Tracer blinks, we're all over the place. We're mixing positioning with blink management, with recall management, with aim, like melee strike usage, blink bombs. Like we're getting really complex when we go to a more complex character. So like I'm someone who really does believe in statistical analysis because I come from computer science as my major. Like I've taken classes on data mining, like done stuff with like machine learning. But in this game, at this state, the stats aren't there. One, the game is highly contextual too. And like, let's just compare something like Go or chess, right? Chess has a finite number of states, a countable number of states, right? Chess is like an 8x8 board, I think. And then there's like 8 pieces or whatever. So you have 8 or 64 to the 8th. That's a large number, but it's not undoable. Like computers are like attempting to reach that at this point, right? Like, and in fact, a computer beats a human or ties a human every single time. Even Magnus Carlsen, the best chess player in the world, undoubtedly maybe the best chess player of all time, would lose to a computer every single time. But like that is a very simple game in comparison to Overwatch, where there are 12 players, all different abilities, infinite number of positions, 18 different maps, right? Or somewhere around that, like 15 to 18 different maps. It's a ton of things. And then you have to add context. So I think basketball is very simple too, and in concept, not in execution. But that is already a game where like you're seeing more and more improvements towards like how much does this lineup do? What is the most effective shot? What type of defensive scheme should we play? You can get statistics on that, but Overwatch, the patch changes within a month, so all the data that you would have gotten if it was manual is wasted. And then and then you go to a different patch and then you have to like discuss things differently, right? Like the variables of physics don't change for basketball. The rules of chess don't change. But Overwatch is constantly changing. So even if you gather enough statistical analysis and you did it by hand for like, because Blizzard doesn't release an API for it, then you still have the problem of this is useless in a month. And you have the problem of, was this like individual skill or not, right? Like you have a lot of different variables floating around. So that's why I don't think it's particularly useful. There's too many game states. But I think that there will be a time where it becomes more useful if Blizzard releases the API and you can get more insight into like beat usage, amp usage, or whatever it may be. Like positioning, you're like, this Lucio's like 70% of the time closer to his backline. Maybe this is how we should be playing. But even then, like there's 12 players, each of them can play like 26 heroes. Like that's already a number of permutations, and then you're not even at XYZ positionings, which are at further reasoning for context. So Overwatch is far from solved or even close to being a simple game, and it changes too much that it really doesn't make sense to invest too much time into it.
I think
my POV.
The general defense of data analysts would then be that you just go to higher order operations, like you compare different metrics that sort of accumulate in these different stats, and then look if there's something intrinsic to the game. And yes, a lot of the time it is true that it's very comp specific, and it only becomes useful if you have it in large numbers. Still, I think there's merit in as such that maybe it helps you sort of compartmentalize or also cover blind spots where you don't think that's possible. So for instance, you got to have a very good justification that someone like Altering is having so much heal per 10. Like something's going wrong in your team. And then, of course, there's a lot going wrong in Shanghai Dragons in Season 1. But maybe that helps you to justify and gives you certain new approaches or ideas where the issue might come from. And then also, now the statistics you get are, I would say, more sophisticated than just damage and, the ones that Overwatch has, or even that Winston's Lab had. So it's also certainly interesting to, I think it opens up legitimate ways to think about team building efforts. So for instance, one thing that I've recently seen is people messing around with the clutch factor of a player. So how good are they in overtime mechanics and stuff like that, right? So, and sort of giving a rating there. And I don't think it needs to be absolutely clinical. right? It doesn't need to be a definitive number based on these sets of circumstances, and where you break it down to the minute little details. I think if you have the bigger, sort of higher order factors, there's value in that. But I have to agree, that's probably only coming in if you're running out of good ideas, I'd say.
Right. And a big problem is that I think there are not a lot of great strategy coaches in Overwatch League. To be a good data analyst or to get the right questions asked, you need to be smart about the game. You need to understand the game more conceptually to ask the right questions. Because if you're just going from like stats and then you look at something and then you're like, okay, these are the 3 factors that are determining the win or loss, right? Like it's this and this and this, and then you form a theory out of it, you're most likely wrong. You're like, oh, okay, well, obviously the person who does more healing is taking more damage, so that's not a good indicator of whether or not we're winning or losing. That doesn't mean we should heal less as Mercy. That just means that the team was losing, right? So I think statistics can lie to you, but you have to be really smart about delving into what type of statistics you want. But I think we're far from that. I think even traditional sports are like trying to get into that, and even then it's hard, and they have much more money invested. Rather than just one data analyst, they have a company source. Like Steve Ballmer owns Second Spectrum, which is like contracted for a large deal of the NBA teams, but that in itself is not like proven to be all that effective. Who knows how effective that will be, but it's getting there, right? But that's millions of dollars in investment, whereas we're hiring one dude for like 100,000 max, right? If he's a good data scientist, that's not enough.
Fair.
Yeah.
Fair. We got to let you go because John Galt in the chat said, "David, today's breakfast is insane. You're missing out." And I don't want to be why you miss out on that. So first,
I think I already did. Awesome for a plate.
Thanks for taking one for the team, taking one for the community, getting to kind of hear from you a little bit more and chat about a lot of, I think, really amazing topics about the LA Gladiators and coaching, just Overwatch League as a whole. I mean, I was entrenched in curiosity the entire time. So thank you so much for doing that. Before we get to you, though, David, Yiska, what do you got coming up this week, man, before we get out of here?
On Sunday, I recorded an esports walks. I need to edit that down. And then I have a couple of thinking it overs where I want to start up again, and we'll see.
Cool. Awesome. What about you, David? Where can people find you? I mean, messages to your LA Gladiator fans out there. Give us it all.
I need to look at what my Twitter account is, actually.
DPei_OW. I had to type it like
DPei_OW. Yeah, that's probably where you can follow me if you want to follow me. I don't have anything else. Thanks for having me on, and I know I talked a lot. Sorry about that. So
that's why we had you on. Is to talk a lot. Yeah, that's why. It's worse when you bring on a guest and they don't talk a lot. Like
you don't want hydration. You don't want the one-word answers. Yes. Yes. I think stats are good. But thanks for having me on. I think this podcast is great for those listening. You know, do what they say. Subscribe. I don't know what else they do. Follow, just give them support because they're doing a great job, and I think this is a really well done podcast.
Oh, thanks, man. I really appreciate that. Check's in the mail. So I'm just kidding. Check's not in the mail. We don't have the money for that. So David, thank you again so much. Make sure to go follow David at DPei_Overwatch, as he said, at DPei_OW, as you said. Cheer on your LA Gladiators. Get those shields up for Season 2. We're less than 3 weeks away. You can follow me at KickedTripod, but most importantly, you can find the show everywhere you can find podcasts, video content, whatever. YouTube, search for OWL Daily Show, Overwatch League Daily, or, of course, Tactical Crouch. Same thing on your podcast feeds. Search for Tactical Crouch, Overwatch League Daily. They're all sharing the same thing. I'm working on getting the names changed to be a little bit more inclusive across all of them. Of course, if you want to support the show, the best way to do that, of course, besides listening and following here on Twitch, we do have a donation link down below. You can subscribe on Twitch. That all goes to help support the quality of the show and everything else. So thank you guys for being here. David, have a great breakfast, and we'll have to see you again next time.
Thanks, guys.